Hey, welcome to the Mario Dattilo Show. I'm your host, Mario Dattilo. I've been investing in mobile home parks and other commercial real estate for years. And on this show, we interview some really interesting and successful real estate investors and business owners. We go behind the scenes on how they do what they do. I know you're going to get a ton of value out of this, so stick around till the end. Hey guys, super excited to be back. I've got a really interesting guest today, Greg Schenk with the Schenk Company. Also, he's got an education company called Schenk Training. And I'm really excited to have him on because he's talking about a property type in an industry that is something that I don't get into a lot. And so this is going to be very unique. We're going to be able to talk about commercial real estate, leasing, and obviously from the tenant side and the landlord side. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about a lot of good stuff. So, Greg, I want to first of all thank you for being on the show. Appreciate you taking time out of your day, and looking forward to this awesome conversation. So, thanks again for being on.
Thank you for having me, Mario. I'm here to help your audience learn, grow, and prosper.
Love it. Now, one thing that's kind of cool is when Greg and I were talking pre-show, and even the research that I've done on Greg is, he's definitely a giving guy. He's definitely interested in educating and helping people grow. So you're probably going to see that threaded throughout the conversation of not only is he transactional, involved in deals and doing a lot of deals around the country, but he's also focused on helping people and educating not only real estate brokers and agents, but also other industry folks as well. So pretty cool. I'm looking forward to getting into that because, as you know, education is something that's important to me too. So Greg, let's talk a little bit about kind of how you got into real estate in general. And then maybe you could just tell us specifically what your focus of business is on right now.
Sure. Well, people always ask me that, and it's a wonderful question. If you would have given me 1,000 careers after college, real estate, and specifically commercial real estate, would not have been one of them. Matter of fact, I had never even heard the term commercial real estate. When I got out of school, I just didn't want to be poor anymore. I was a marketing major. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do with my life. Jobs were scarce here. I wanted to stay in Columbus where I am. There wasn't any good jobs. I actually got out of school a quarter early to try to beat the job rush. I ended up getting a job that moved me to Southern California doing something totally different. And while I was there, a friend of mine who was in commercial real estate said, "I think you'd be good at this." So I flew back to Ohio for a friend's wedding, and I had a gut feel Columbus was going to grow. So I trusted my gut. I moved back and got into commercial real estate with the largest company in the country without having any money, any contacts, didn't own a suit, didn't own a car. I mean, you're talking about starting from square one, scratch. I set some very high goals. And fortunately, within 2 years, I hit those goals. 7 years later, I did the biggest deal in the state. And at that time, decided to leave the biggest company in the country and go out on my own, specifically representing tenants, buyers, and investors. So at that time, this is mid 90s, lots going on. At the same time, I saw there was a real gap in education. Specifically, all the continuing education for agents was residentially slanted. There's not a separate license. So I designed 2 courses for continuing ed, and it went so good in the state of Ohio that I took it nationwide. And then I spread it out to talking to people like attorneys, accountants, bankers, financial planners, giving market overviews on every product type from each person's position, as well as things like financial literacy, investment property acquisition strategies, things of that nature.
Very cool. So we're transactional, and then you went into education as well.
So
Awesome.
I do both. I do both. Yeah. So I've been representing tenants and buyers for 36 years. I've been educating people for 25, and I've been investing for myself as well as in partnerships for 25 as well.
Very cool. So yeah, you're definitely covering all the bases. And what I like too is that you're not only just brokering transactions and leasing and doing all that, you're also invested in deals too. So you really understand it from an investor standpoint as well, which, as you know, a lot of the listeners on listening to this show right now are commercial real estate investors, probably a high concentration of apartment, mobile home park, self-storage investors. And so going in and talking about, more more of commercial tenants. When I say commercial tenants, I mean more retail, office, industrial, those type of tenants. We don't get to talk about that as much on this show. So this is going to be super interesting. Just out of curiosity, what kind of real estate are you invested in? Like what property types?
Well,
Personally.
I started out in the late 90s. I owned my own office building and I owned another office building with the doctor. The doctor ended up buying me out and I flipped those into model homes, which I thought was the most conservative investment I could get. These were brand new homes in golf course communities. And then the interest only crisis, as I'd call it, in the early 2000s hit, and everybody was getting foreclosed on in those golf course communities. And the developer builder, who was supposed to be my liaison to help me lease or sell them when their lease was up, ended up being my competitor. And it turned into a nightmare, to say the least.
Jeez.
And so it really taught me a very big lesson on there. Number one was I wasn't cut out or have the patience to self-manage, even something that was brand new that had really very little management to be done. And when I'm speaking and teaching, that's the biggest mistake I hear from the people, as well as the biggest mistake that I made, for sure. So after that time, I really specified in investing in partnerships. Now, your audience may not know what an accredited investor is. I don't know if you've gone over that in previous podcasts, but I was fortunate to meet a gentleman that had sold a company, had a great deal of money, was too young to retire. And so I helped him find an apartment complex that was off market. And he ended up putting investors together to purchase that. And since that time, 21 years later, he now has $1 billion under asset.
Nice.
And so for the last 20 years, I've been investing with him in predominantly value add apartments, student housing we've done in the past, hotels, mixed use, and we have one senior living property. But the majority of it is value add apartments where we go in. Maybe it was mom and pop managed, mismanaged. People didn't upkeep it, and we go in and fix it up, refi it. And they're all long-term holds, typically 5-7 year holds. We've held one as long as 15 years.
Nice.
And then outside of that group, I invested in a strip center, retail center that we built right when the market crashed in 2008. And so we went through about 7 years of really lean times, thought we were going to lose it. Bank called the note. We had about everything that could go wrong, went wrong, but it was in an A-plus location, super construction. And even through COVID, we managed to survive. We had an outlot that sat empty for 8 years that we thought a bank or a medical center was going to go into. We ended up getting a Chick-fil-A there and selling it at such a low cap rate. We held back some of the proceeds that basically got us through the shutdowns of COVID and some of the tenants closing and restructuring, things of that nature. So I've been fortunate to see about every property type out there, whether it's been through my clients that I'm representing or in these partnerships that I've purchased. And then I've got an 18-year-old son getting his license right now, and I bought him a rental property that is individually owned instead of in the partnerships just in April in our market. And our market's one of the hottest markets in the country. So a little bit of everything really answers that. I would not say I'm an expert in senior living, but in all the other areas, I'd say I'm pretty proficient on.
I love it. And let me point something out that I'm kind of getting from you. You said in the beginning you learned, self-managing property management maybe wasn't for you. Did I get that statement right? You weren't interested in actually self-managing things. So was that a correct, did I get that right?
100%. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people, you can be extremely smart, but if you're not an expert in this, that's your profit or loss. And so far, you could lose the property. And I've had clients in the past, specifically with office buildings, where they mismanaged and lost the largest tenant in the building, and the building ended up getting foreclosed on because they didn't know the market. They thought they were saving a few bucks when in fact they were costing themselves, their livelihood on that. So after those occasions with clients of mine, you see somebody that invests millions of dollars and have that happen to, it's whoa, that really is a slap in the face.
It's good education on somebody else's dime, right?
Yes, yes. But for me, it was hard. Now, the large group that I invest with, I will say this as well. We had 2 projects in 20 years that had a hard time with. Since that time, we make the property management company put equity in the project to make sure their values are aligned with ours. And I can't tell you how well that's done for us. And in fact, they now bring us deals that we can't find because the track record is so good. So
I like that.
That was a real aha moment for me. That's probably been 8 or 10 years in the making, and they're making them put a significant amount. If we're raising, say, 8 to 10 million, they're putting like 500,000 in the deal. So we know they're, got a good balance sheet. They're experts at what they do for that specific niche. And I think that's something really key for your listeners is you want to surround yourself with some trusted advisors that really know what the heck they're doing. That's a real estate attorney, not a general attorney. That's an accountant that understands all the benefits of owning real estate. And that's having that property manager that is in that niche. Like, you could be the greatest apartment property manager, but if it's a mixed use and you don't understand the retail or the office component, you're SOL.
That's a really good nugget for people, because a lot of times, especially if you're getting into a new property type, it's easy to say, well, I'm going to bring my manager from mobile home parks or apartments over into this self-storage facility or into this other retail building or office building because they say they can do it. And then you end up learning, wait a minute, they were learning on your dime in that case, and they make some pretty expensive mistakes. So I like how you clarify that you need to have people that are really experts in the niche that you're investing in. And someone who's investing in multiple property types will work with multiple management companies if they're going to go the third-party management route. You're also very, helping clarify to investors that just because you're an investor and an owner doesn't necessarily mean you're an operations person. Doesn't mean you're actually going to manage the real estate. There's kind of different layers. There's, ownership interest, then there's asset management, and then there's property management. In some cases, the ownership interest is also the asset manager and the property manager. But in many cases, especially in commercial real estate, that property management gets carved off to an expert, and sometimes even the asset management gets carved off to another expert to handle that, to where someone may just be capital, and that's perfectly fine. You've just got to know what you're good at and what you want to do. So I think you've made some excellent points there. I think you've also learned some really great lessons. You said that there's been just a couple of deals out of a lot that have struggled. And I would say you probably learn the most from the hard deals, right? Because you've actually got to get creative. You see, and even if you aren't doing the property management, Greg is watching these people make very difficult decisions to save deals and make them successful. So very, very important. One thing I was going to ask you, when you're working with, from a representation standpoint, what do you think you're doing the most of from a tenant or investor, world? What's your typical property type you're working on, or what's the highest percentage?
My day-to-day historically has been representing office tenants on renewals or relocations to lease or purchase. When the market crashed 10 years ago, whatever it was, the number of people that I had buying buildings shrunk dramatically. I used to probably have 6 companies a year that would buy buildings. I don't think I've had 6 in 6 years buy buildings. So what I've seen is companies, and this is true for investors, they don't put a strategic plan together. What I try to do is I help a company or an individual investor put together a strategic plan and then implement that plan. We see too many people working in the business, but not taking the step back and working on it. And obviously knowing your exit strategy going in. So the better we plan for that, the better we can help people. And we actually have 2 forums on our website, one for tenants and one for investors, that kind of some food for thought: the who, the what, the why, the when, and where, asking all these different what if situations that they probably have never heard of before, that they need to get with their attorney for any agreement, and make sure, especially if it's with partners, that you have a buy sell. And again, the amount of seminars I've done around the country, I don't beat my chest and tell my wins. I talk about the horror stories that I've heard from other people And I've had enough of them myself. I had a full head of hair when I got in this business.
And for those listening, he's very bald.
Yeah. So, I mean, I invested in 2 venture capital deals, and I'm sorry to say that neither one was successful. And the lessons I learned off of those alone, one of them was a gas station that a large bank brought me, and they were the primary lender, and I was the secondary lender. And the poor kid that ran this gas station, which I thought was a good location in a golf course community close to where I had invested in these model homes, was working 100 hours a week and couldn't make it work. I did not negotiate the lease on the gas station, and he was just paying too much rent for, I'll call a pioneering market that's now a AAA market on there. So that really opened my eyes on that. So the defeats you have or that your clients have, you really got to learn from those. You got to put your ego on the shelf and say, okay, what can we do better? What can we learn from this? Nobody wants to lose money, whether it's a stock or a piece of real estate on there. But really, again, surrounded by your critical team. And today, you really got to trust those people. You got to have the right contractor. He's going to tell you the lead times of some of these materials that are come in that can, again, make or break, some deals. If you're building new, which is absurdly expensive now, some of the lead times for items can be 6-8 months, even a year. I just finished a large manufacturing client, and they needed some overstandard size doors, which number one, were going to cost 6 figures, a lot, and we're going to take up to 6 months to get. So when time is money, if you don't have somebody that knows that stuff, and nobody expects you or I, any investor, to know that kind of stuff, and obviously with all the logistics headaches that's been around in this country, that's going to continue for a while, I think. So you really got to have somebody that understands the numbers and can do that.
Should this is going to be, I think, super helpful to the entrepreneurs that watch this, that maybe aren't in the commercial real estate investing space, but own businesses. Should a company own their space, or should they be leasing? And what are some things that a business should be considering when they're trying to decide, hey, do we want to have our own space that we actually have ownership interest in, or leasing?
That's a great question. We actually do a separate course on that, believe it or not, but we'll give you the 2-minute nutshell version of it.
Cool.
The first thing company needs to do is see how fast they're growing. Are they growing? Or are they steady in their facility needs? So we get a space planner involved to lay out a generic, non-building specific plan. And we try to get everybody that's key in the organization to go through that, to really visualize. Most people are visual. Okay, we think we need 10,000 feet. Well, how long is that 10,000 feet going to be good for? It does no good for me to go help you buy a 10,000 foot building if 3 years later you need 15 and 20,000 feet. And that opens up questions like, do you want to be a landlord or just have it for your own use? Do you buy a 20,000 foot building, rent out 10 until you need it? Well, obviously there's risks and rewards associated with that. So we try to find out, number one, what is a company's risk tolerance? Again, that could be an individual investor or a company. If you're married and your wife's a 2 and you're an 8, you might struggle on investments. And I've seen that with medical doctors that I've represented. They had 5 guys ready to retire. They didn't want to buy. They had 5 young guys that had student loans. They couldn't do it. And the 5 guys in the middle all were flush. They all wanted to buy. So we got to know their risk tolerance. We need to know their credit. We need to know their growth strategy, which the floor plans really do for that. And then, is the product available for the size and type that they want in the market space they want to go? And usually I recommend against build to suits, because they're just, again, astronomically, unless it's usually a medical or a data center, because there's so much. Even build out for office space now, I mean, I've heard as high as $100 a foot in some markets.
Jeez.
But yeah, it used to be 40 to 50. I did a fairly large deal for a division of the Supreme Court about 2.5 years ago. And I think it was we got bids up to 75 then. So yeah, it's all over depending on the quality of finishes that you want. So it's not a right and wrong answer for own versus lease. You've got different ways in accounting. If you put it in an LLC, you can rent it back to the company. on there, but it's what's your risk, what's your time period of hold? Do you think you're going to be able to grow or not grow if you're steady? More of that, and then today, of course, do people even want to come in?
Yeah.
What type of operation it? Are you going to demand them to come in? What are the options you're putting in there? Amenities. I built a building for a company where we put both a gym and a cafeteria in the building that really gave a lot of employee loyalty. We put it right across the street from the park, and it was mostly female employees, so they could go walk at lunch, take their kids after work, that sort of thing from there. So the same thing. It's a lot of those who, what, why, when, where's. What's important for them. So I try to get the client to paint us a picture, see what their short and long-term goals are. Now, for an owner user, you can do an SBA loan with 10% down and lock that in for a fairly long time. So even though rates are up a little bit, you can still get in pretty things. So on $1 million, that's 100 grand down versus typically 200 grand down plus fees. There is some upfront fees with the SBA, but you can amortize those over the term of the loan as well. Okay.
And also one thing that you just mentioned there about the down payment, businesses need to decide how much liquidity they're willing to tie up in a building versus put back into their business, right? So I mean, if they're flush with cash and they can do that, cool. If they're not, or yeah, they may need to keep that money turning inside their business. And so tying up 20% or 10% of a building could hinder them too, I would think.
Yeah. So the other question I was asking with that is, what kind of return do you get by putting the money back in the business, by hiring more people, by buying more pieces of equipment or whatever it is, software that's going to help your business grow? And the better answers we get to that. Now, obviously, real estate's a great long-term wealth builder. And I thank God every day that I've been educated and learned about it, because every dream I ever had as a child has come through. And again, I told you I grew up with zero, so I'm very fortunate to be able to, to do that. And I owe all of that to a good work ethic, learning, and buying real estate.
That's awesome. I actually have a friend that's several friends that do this, but one that came to mind while you were talking about that. He's got a certain business with a bunch of warehouse space. And what he's been doing is he's been buying each building, he's been leasing back the building to his business. And his long-term retirement plan is really that he's going to sell the business, retain the real estate, continue to lease it back to his own company. So he's created all this equity in the real estate. He's got a business he can sell, and then he's going to have the cash flow from those buildings after he sells the business. So there's definitely some thought that needs to go into it, but depending on that business, I mean, and a lot of the questions that you're talking about asking yourself, you can really use real estate as a great complement or retirement or strategy within their business model if it fits.
Without a doubt. Again, it gets back to risk tolerance. I like it. Not everybody does. And I would say I grew up, and I'm still a very conservative person, even though I'm in an extremely risky business. The question I ask is, what's going to let you sleep at night? What's going to keep you up at night? If you take $250,000 and put it, I don't care if it's self-storage or apartments or industrial, which are three of the hottest, right now, and it's going to be a long-term hold, and you may not see any money for the first year, 2 years while you're rehabbing it. Can you live without that? So I ask people, are you looking for immediate income or long-term income? Can you go a year or two without that? If there is a cash call and all of a sudden you got to come up with 10 grand or 100 grand, can you do it? And I've had that happen to me, unexpectedly. And fortunately, that I could do it, and actually bought somebody else's share out that couldn't do it on one of the apartment deals that I'm in on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point, because when you own a business and you own the real estate is really a separate animal in itself. I mean, people don't think about it, but if you've got a business that needs 50,000 square feet to operate and you buy that building, who's going to actually do the facility maintenance and oversight on the building itself, the common, the common area maintenance contracts, the CapEx reserve that needs to be managed, and CapEx needs to be done every certain number of years. So there's a lot more involved than just owning a building and a business. It's a separate beast in itself. So if someone's really tight on human capital in their business, they may not want to own that building because it might take away from their business. And so that's good stuff. One thing I was going to ask you is, I know you do a lot with office. What's what's it looking like with the remote work? Are you seeing a big decrease in demand for office space? Or are you seeing it stay pretty consistent, or what does that look like?
It really varies by market, and it really varies by downtown versus suburb. The last statistics I see, and I should tell you that I study the market about 3 to 4 hours a day. So because I'm speaking around the country, I'm learning every product type. I'm listening to every podcast, magazine, article, etc. So in the low 40% is people back, but it's very different by every different type. A lot of people are so used to walking around in shorts and a t-shirt, they never want to put a suit on again, myself included.
Amen. Right here.
Okay. I spent 9 years walking into a high-rise building and never wore anything but a suit. Okay. Now, not so much. So a lot of people, which I mentioned earlier, haven't put a strategic plan together yet. They're still trying to say, well, is monkeypox coming? Is this coming? Is logistics errors coming? It was riots, fires, whatever. There's been so much upheaval the last 2 years. Is there a new norm? And I've heard that on many podcasts. Is there a new norm? I think you miss the camaraderie. I'm a single father. I worked from home for almost 15 years. I own my own office building. I miss it a lot. My intention was to build 6 or 8 people and get in there and really help them, learn and grow. But my path, I put my son first. So I've been working at that. But I would say I miss it. I miss the camaraderie without a doubt. And can you get more done face to face? I believe you can. So in my mind, in my gut, I think it's right to be back. Whether you're back 3 days a week or 5 days a week, I think you can argue by anyone. So demand for everything is going to go down a little bit. It's just how much. But the ripple effect from, well, now your corner deli might go out of business. The shoe shine guy might there. The parking lot operator might not get the same receipts. They're not going downtown to see the play maybe, or the concert, whatever it may be. So I think some downtowns have been hurt. Today in the paper, you might have seen the only market that went down negative for housing costs was San Francisco.
Wow.
And they portrayed a house that was on the market for 9. They lowered it to 7, as in 7 million, and they put it at auction at 4.5.
Yeah.
So
that's got some different dynamics in that city that are causing that issue.
So some of the bigger ones are going to have a lot more sublease space. So what does that mean? That means for a company looking to dip its toe in a market, you can probably get an 18-month, 2-year, 3-year sublease at 50 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
So it's a great opportunity, right? One man's problems, another man's, reward of what they can do. So we've got people in like 80 some cities around the country. So I can tell you, okay, this market's got more opportunities than others. And again, every product type is totally different. Our industrial market doesn't even have 2% vacancy, but our office market's close to 20.
Yeah.
So, and again, it varies between Class A space and Class B space. The big thing is some of the older buildings, the landlords either can't afford or won't put the money back into them to bring them back to that level. I just told you a build out could be 70, 80, even $100 a foot. So you got a 100,000 foot building and you want to rehab half of it. That's a big number. Not every landlord can do that. So some of those buildings will be repurposed into apartments, into condos, into mixed use. Okay. So look for that the next 2 years. I think you're going to see a lot of that. And that's opportunities for your investors without a doubt. Again, the ones willing to take the risk.
Can we talk a little bit about something here? There's, a lot of us are familiar with multifamily. We're familiar with mobile home park storage, more of a residential type tenant or a consumer tenant. I would say it's less widely known about the commercial tenants, the office, the retail, even the industrial. And as a landlord of those types of property, what I've seen is that there's definitely high reward opportunities in it. There's also a much larger risk involved. So yeah, you can do very, very well on a retail building or an office building, but you've kind of hinted at a few problems that can happen where, lease comes up, tenant moves out. So now you've got vacancy, which is not like an apartment turning, or tenant improvements, which is something that you've also mentioned. Can you maybe just talk about, for those who are maybe familiar with a consumer tenant, maybe the opportunities and the risks with having a commercial tenant?
Okay, so let's talk about office and retail, because those are ones where you're putting the most money back into the property.
Yep.
Again, warehouse demand is through the roof. You could build literally an extra 1,000,000 square feet in every city of industrial, and it's probably not going to be enough with
Jeez.
what. Okay, you could probably say the same thing with apartments. Mixed use, office, retail is different. So I told you I'm a partner in a retail center. We had 5 tenants close their doors. All right. 3 of them, I think we let back open at lower rent while the shutdown was happening. Okay. One of them was a mattress firm, and a lot of mattress businesses gone to online. So they were back in at half rent. And then we finally, they shut their doors, or they had to shut their doors, or we shut the doors for them, one of the two. So we took their space and cut it in half. Just to subdivide the space was over $300,000.
Wow.
To put the demising wall in, to put an extra set of doors in the front and the back, and an extra restroom facility on there. Now, fortunately, we've got it leased, but you either get a line of credit from the bank, or you're going to a cash call to your partners to say, pony up $300,000 to $500,000. So you got to know that going in. And retail is a different animal, where usually the landlord provides what's called a vanilla box, which is painted drywall, a drop ceiling, and a set of restrooms, and then everything inside that's specific to that particular tenant. It's on the tenant's dime, unless they have super good credit and we'll do a super long lease. And then sometimes the landlord will amortize that above and beyond the rent. So I should say there's 4 things that go into the factor on this that your investors should know: the credit of the tenant, the length of term of the lease, the amount of space, and the cost of that build out to finish the space. Okay, so each deal is analyzed by those 4 things. In retail, you have the vanilla box, as I mentioned. In office, you're usually given what's called a tenant improvement allowance. So depending on if it's a new building, what I'll call a Class A in a great location, it's usually a different allowance and a different rental rate than in a Class B and Class C, downtown versus suburb. Again, how much build out is already in the building? Is it up to snuff? There's capital improvement items. That's a landlord item. That could be things like HVAC, putting in new heating and cooling. And as companies have packed people in, that is super important. If you've got an old HVAC system, the first thing people bitch about is not paying too much rent. It's I'm too hot or I'm too cold. Even in nice office buildings, you will see that happen. Okay, so the difference with the office space is you're given an allowance, and then if it's over that allowance, you do the space plan, you get a contractor to give you an estimate of that. Then it's usually amortized again, or the tenant has to come out of pocket. I can tell you, in 36 years of doing this, none of my clients are coming out of pocket. They either don't have the money, and most of my clients are privately held business. I'm not working with a Fortune 500 the majority of the time. So I'm dealing with XYZ software company. They don't want to spend $100,000 out of their pocket for tenant improvements on a building that they're not owning.
Right.
Okay. So that's the big thing that people need to realize, is that there is additional capital. Now, what's the upside to that? You get the building leased, and all of a sudden the NOI on the building's a lot more. And depending on the cap rate you're using at the time of the market, the value of the property's a lot more. And that's why people do it.
You see a lot more triple net and responsibilities pushed to the tenants in commercial than you see in the consumer type properties. So, for example, he's talking about improvements that need to be made, but then ongoing expenses that are often shared by the tenant versus paid for, on a gross lease by the landlord. Maybe talk a little bit about that too, kind of the
Sure.
different layers of net to triple net and gross.
Well, that's something that most people don't understand. So I'm glad you brought up that question. Triple nets usually are taxes, utilities, insurance, maintenance, and janitorial. Those 5. So on retail, 99% of the time, it's a triple net lease. Okay. So you're paying a base rate. If it's in a good location, newer property, could be 35 bucks a foot, and your triple nets may be another 10 or 15 bucks a foot. So you've got 50 bucks all in. On office space, same deal, different rent structure usually. Say in our market, it might be $20 triple net, and it might be $10 on the operating expenses. So $30 all in, okay? In our market here in Columbus. So again, the base rate, and then the taxes, utilities, insurance, maintenance, and janitorial. What can you control on those? Well, if you're working 3 shifts a day, your utility costs are probably going to be a lot higher. Your janitorial costs are going to be a heck of a lot higher, okay? The other items, like we mentioned before, the roof, the HVAC, other parking lot items and that, those are capital improvement items. Now, some owners and the property management try to make a profit center out of those and pass those along to the tenant. But if they have an excellent tenant rep broker like myself, that is never going to happen. And we're going to try to cap the controllable operating expenses, meaning they can't go up more than, I usually try for a cap of 4 to 5% a year with a right to audit at any time. So that way the tenant knows going in what the range should be. Like if we have a terrible year of snowfall, something you don't see down there in Naples, and we don't get that often here, your operating expenses are going to be a little bit higher. But
Sure.
Other than that, you shouldn't see too many surprises. The alternative to the triple net is on older buildings. You'll hear the term full service or gross lease, or sometimes full service gross. This means instead of paying all those items individually that I just mentioned, you're paying one rental payment to the landlord. So it still could be in that office example, 30 bucks a foot instead of the 20 plus the 10 for the operating expenses. And typically the reason for that is the spaces aren't separately metered for the HVAC the way they are in newer properties.
Super good. Now, you're so sitting in the seat of the investor landlord, you've just brought up a lot of great points, both from a how do I push the expenses off to the tenant, and also how do you control your, the investor's expenses? If you move those expenses to the tenant, now you have less fluctuation. It's more predictable. At the same time, the tenant is going to negotiate the other direction. They're going to try and either push the expenses back to the landlord, or they're going to implement some sort of triggers or mechanisms that control where those numbers go so that it's more predictable. So whether you're the tenant or the landlord, those are all different functions of those leases that are really important to know. Just curious, what's kind of on, let's say retail, let me rephrase this. How does the length of a commercial lease affect the value of the building and the cap rate and on that cash flow that comes in?
Well, it's huge. It's one of the top 4, as I said. And banks want to see that long-term good credit lease to finance. If they're not as long, if they're under 5-year terms, your debt coverage ratio is going to have to be higher. You're going to have to put more money down. So if I see a strip center, retail center for sale, and they're all 2 to 3 years till the lease expires, we're going to discount it heavily. Okay. Or we're going to try to go in and negotiate renewals as part of the contingencies with the seller.
And that's a value add strategy, right? So if you're buying the building as an investor, you can then put that in the contract that it's contingent, and then you actually go to the tenants, pre-negotiate terms, and when we think about consumer tenants, a lot of times it's hard for us to comprehend that the landlord would allow us to go talk to their tenant and tell them that they're selling. But in commercial real estate, it's much different. Number one, he's explained that lease terms are much longer. So ultimately they don't have any say in it. They're not pulling out in the next 6 months because they found out the building is selling, but also you're working business to business. So he can go and negotiate terms with that tenant to try and restructure it and create value as soon as he closes or whenever that lease expires or whatever. So that is a really strong value add strategy.
I mean, you're going to do everything you can. And there's other areas like LED lighting, whether it's office or retail. LED lighting is going to cut down on the utility cost. We try to obviously get the landlord to pay for it to have newer lights installed. And I've got a company that does, that does that. I know a lot of your apartment people will do separately metering water, so the tenant pays for the water, whereas in a lot of old leases, the landlord paid for it, and I mean that's a huge cash cow.
Brutal.
So there's a lot of areas like that, but again, it gets down to how long. And I gave you an example earlier of a division of the Supreme Court that I represented. We actually had to do a 15-year lease for them to get a turnkey, meaning the landlord paying for the entire build out. At 10 years, they were going to have to come out of pocket $250,000. And because this was a pseudo state organization, that was not going to fly.
Yeah.
So most landlords, you're betting on what's the market going to do. You're putting bumps in the rate, no matter what product type it is, and depending on the market conditions and how good the building is, will dictate the type of bumps that you can get. Like right now, inflation until recently was very flat. So if you put a consumer price index bump in it, it was nothing. But now it's what, 6%, 8%, could be 10%. So if all of a sudden you're paying $100,000 and the next year you're paying 110, you're gonna feel that. So there's a lot of ways to do it. So we have a 44-point lease checklist that we go over every single one of these items. And there's usually a half a dozen of them that are very landlord slanted. So we'll try to negotiate what I call a win-win negotiation. We're not there to beat the landlord up for every last dime, because if they're not making money, the building can't be run properly. And there's nothing worse than you walking in and seeing a crappy lobby, dirty restrooms, the parking lot's dingy, the lights are out, it's not safe, the trash cans in the back alley aren't emptied, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's really good. I feel like I'm kind of sitting down with the enemy right now, and the enemy is telling me all their strategies against me. And I'm kidding about that, but it's what's interesting is that Greg is sitting on the other side of the table to landlords a lot. Obviously, he represents landlords as well, but being able to kind of hear the strategies that he's utilizing to make sure that the tenants are getting what the best case scenario that they can get is pretty interesting to me. You mentioned bumps, and that's one thing that I've always had a little bit of a hard time on the commercial real estate side, is that I feel like if there's definitely, well, let me back up. The risk that I see in a lot of these buildings is that the leases don't keep up with inflation. And you mentioned one way to make sure that the rent keeps up with inflation. Is there anything else as an investor we should be thinking about that would make sure that we don't get wiped out by inflation on some of these leases? I've seen a few deals cross my desk where it's like, cool, it's a 20-year lease, great tenant, but it's 1% rent increases every 3 years or something horrible like that. You just go, that landlord's getting killed. What's something that
because again, inflation was flat for 20 years.
Right.
So nobody thought of it on that. Well, you obviously put bumps. So an office space on a 20-year amount, $20 a foot rent, you might be getting a 50 cents per square foot bump. The other way they do it is they'll do a 5-year lease with 3 5-year options, and those options that are significantly higher. But that's going to get down to, again, the credit of the tenant. What does the tenant really want? And how much money are you putting in? And again, if I'm negotiating for them, I may be putting in other tenant improvement allowances in years 5, 10, 15, if we're doing that type of thing. For example, paint and carpet. A lot of carpet's not going to last 10 years. Or in year 7, you're going to spend $50,000, repainting and recarpeting the facility, new lights, whatever the case may be. So my goal is I'll listen to what's important to the tenant, and it's different for everybody. For some, it's secured parking, cheap parking, free parking. For some, it's the sign on the building. They got the ego, or they want the exposure and the traffic. So it's not the same. But what the landlords can do is really hire a good listing agent. All right. I don't do listings. Again, I strictly represent the tenant. Even though I'm a partner in partnerships, I have no day-to-day operations and stuff, and I don't do anything that would be a conflict to me. I don't own office buildings anymore on there. But you hire somebody that keeps their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the market, so they can tell you, yes, you can raise the rate $1, or no, you can only raise it 25 cents, or in fact, your building's a little bit out of the way, you're going to have to reduce the rent. But, can you refinance it? Can you do seller if you're buying it? Can you do seller financing? And, put caveats in there if the building is leased up. So there's a lot of negotiation strategies. I should mention that I'm a master certified negotiation expert. I've got over 100 hours of designation and courses that I've done in this, and I've probably helped 900 clients over the years in every wake and size. So you see things going through, and with a lot of these great real estate attorneys that I've worked with, I get them to do the legal, I do the business negotiations. But the biggest thing is listening to the client. And in this case, for your listeners, whoever the client is, if it's the landlord, if it's a tenant, if it's the investor, what's really important to them? What is their cash situation? Is it a short or long-term hold, on there? Are they doing it themselves or in a partnership? Who's making those crucial decisions? But communicating and then having that documented very closely. And again, I can give you another horror story on another venture capital deal that I did where everything wasn't documented as well as it should have been. And it ended up not being a good deal for me. And I'm not a litigious person. I wasn't going to sue somebody. It was somebody who was a very good friend of mine. But in reality, it wasn't a good deal. And I should have never gone into it. I trusted them on there. But trust and verify, you've heard that with, a lot of different places. That's very, very true today. And get somebody else you trust to give you a second opinion. Yes, trust your gut. And the more deals I've done, obviously, the better I can trust my gut. But when you're new, you don't know. So have somebody else. And you've heard of opportunity zones. I don't know if any of your investors are getting into those.
Definitely.
I happen to look at a hotel deal not far from you in Fort Lauderdale off of Los Olas.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, how can an opportunity zone be right off of Los Olas in this beautiful area? Which I'm thinking, who's picking these opportunity zones?
Sounds like an opportunity.
Well, I thought so too, until I had my friend that works that market look at it, and he read the fine print better than I did. And it's hard to read 90 pages of fine print.
Yeah.
You got to be very patient. That's why attorneys get paid the big bucks, because they're going to read that 90 pages of fine print. So in this case, the developer was taking their land profit up front in the deal where they're buying it for a song because it was in the opportunity zone, but they valued it like $10 million. So they were making like $6 million on day one, which really should have gone to all of the investors probably that were putting it in there. So fortunately, my friend told me that, and I ended up not investing in the deal. So the devil's in the details. You
Definitely.
Really got to know. You got to be patient to do your due diligence. So what I tell people, and I meant to say this a little bit earlier, I tell people to get everything together. I don't care if it takes you 6 months to get your updated tax strategies, meet with your banker, find out how much you can borrow, how much you're comfortable borrowing. But then once you have all that, be ready to strike when the right opportunity comes, because it's not going to be sitting there for 3 weeks or a month. I promise you, there's probably 100 other people, if not more, looking for it, especially if it's $5 million and under. You got 10,000 people looking at it.
That's good. That's really good. So in conclusion, someone who's, let's say I've got a building vacant, retail building, or there's some vacancy in it. I know you're working on the buyers, on the tenant side. As a landlord, should they be connecting with a leasing agent very early on in their due diligence process? And what does that look like?
Without a doubt. And there's national conferences for retail called ICSC in Las Vegas, where every player is there. So usually the developer, the owner, the listing agent is going there, and they're hunting out deals based on the demographics and the types of people that they think they're going to get. But yeah, another huge mistake. People are bringing people in too late. You want their opinion. If you interview 3 people and you find out really quick, well, this guy's done 100 retail deals for this type of thing. Yeah, that's probably your person. And, I always look and say, just look at Google me, YouTube me, look at my LinkedIn. And, you're going to find out pretty quick that I've been doing this a long time. But, because we're talking high risk, high reward here. It's usually multi-millions of dollars of things. So it's not a small assignment to do. And what are they going to do? And obviously have it in writing what they're going to do. Right. Too many people just don't hear back. And there's a lot of lazy people that put a sign out and don't do a heck of a lot. A big reason I got into the tenant buyer side was because I wanted to help people get what they wanted, not sell them anything. But
Sure.
whatever side you're on, you got to do your due diligence.
Yeah, that's really good. There's somebody that I was talking to a couple weeks ago, and they said, yeah, I've kind of avoided anything consumer tenant wise, and they've strictly went to the commercial space because they don't want anybody sleeping in their properties. And I never thought about that. I went, huh. He goes, yeah, I don't want to own property that people sleep in, that they stay in overnight. I want them there from 8 to 6. And after that, I want them gone. And that makes his life a lot easier because he's not getting calls late at night. He's not getting, the building isn't taking as much wear and tear. Somebody's not living in it. And it was just an interesting take that I'd never heard anybody say before in 15 years of investing. He's like, yeah, I don't want to own buildings that people sleep in. I'm like,
well, again, if you don't have a property manager, if you have a property manager, you're not dealing with that.
Right.
If you're trying to do it all and wear 4 hats, yes. And again, I did it maybe for 3 or 4 years. It was awful. So I knew right away, I'm not handy. I'm not patient. I didn't want to deal with it. My time was more valuable. And that's the biggest thing I tell people is you value your time, whether it's $20 or $200 an hour, you can hire a competent property manager for a lot less than what your time's worth as an investor.
True. Education. What are you doing in the education space as we wind down here? I mean, like what are you doing live education? Is it mostly pre-recorded? Like, tell me a little bit about that company of yours.
We've done both. Well, the schenkseminars.com grew out of the commercial real estate. When I left the largest company in the country to go out on my own, I said, how can I differentiate myself? Okay. People thought I was committing suicide. And the exact opposite happened. My business over doubled within 2 years. Because number one, I wasn't selling, I was educating. So I'm giving this people understanding that even the best CEOs and CFOs, if you're not in the market every day, there's no way to keep your hands around it, especially now.
Right.
Okay. Especially now. So I designed these courses on the market and on the process. So I teach people how to be a master of the market and a master of the process, whether a rookie or a 30 years in the business. And then I expanded it to things like we just talked about: leasing versus buying, investment property acquisition, sales skills, people skills, entrepreneur skills, on their financial literacy. Being a single dad, I went into my son's school. I wanted to make sure kids understood. You get a work ethic, you find your passions in life, you work like hell, and the world can be yours.
Love it.
Okay. You're looking at somebody that was a golf caddy from 5th grade on, that worked 2 jobs all through high school and college. And I told you, at 21, I didn't have a nickel to my name. By 28, I was making a 6-figure income. And by 40, I was financially secure. So a lot of hard work taking risks, but that's my goal for the rest of my life, is to help people get a foundation for lifelong success. So you can do what you want, when you want, with whom you want.
Super cool. Greg, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed this conversation. There's one thing I want to point out. I can tell that Greg is a details guy, and frankly, in the brokerage space and in real estate in general, a lot of times you've got people who are high energy, high people skills, but they don't focus on the details. They don't know the details. Their head isn't in it. And so I really respect that. You've got it very well systemized, thought out. You've spent a lot of time on it, but you're really focused on the details in your leasing and everything that you're doing. And I respect that a lot. So pretty cool. Greg, how can people get a hold of you? And maybe just to clarify, how can you add value to other people? Meaning, like, whether it's education or your other business, like
Sure.
Specifically, who should contact you and how can you help them?
Well, again, I mentioned earlier, we have experts in about 80 plus US markets and about 120 around the world. Schenkcompany.com. A lot of people butcher my last name. It's SCHENK company.com. So we're going to help any tenant. We'll do a no cost review of their lease. Within 48 hours, we'll tell them if it's on the market, up, down, whatever. So we do a lot of lease restructuring and renewals. Over 70% of our clients come to us saying they're going to move, but they're too busy working in the business and didn't plan far enough ahead. So we ended up restructuring or renewing them at more favorable terms. And the other 30%, we're helping them lease or purchase a new building. then the schenkseminars.com really can help anybody that wants to become educated about the commercial real estate market and how to prosper in it, whether you're an agent and want to learn to master the market and master the process, whether you're an investor that want to be partnered with other people or have a contact in your local market. We do both seminars, webinars, and one-on-one coaching. I mean, I've had people fly to me, stay at my house overnight, see all my systems, hear my success and horror stories, and really get to know them. I'm a totally relationship-based commercial real estate advisor. That's first and foremost. I'm not a transaction-oriented person. We're a consultant first and a resultant second. We take the time to develop that to help people learn, grow, and prosper.
Very cool. I appreciate you being on the show again, Greg. Guys, do business with Greg, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks again, Mario. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got out of this as much as I did. I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star review so we can reach more people. Jump over to mariodattilo.net and find out what else I got going on. Be sure to connect with me on all the socials, and I'll see you on next week's show.